On October 6, 2019, a man with the same name as Marvel's Deadpool walked into a bar in Cape Coral, Florida. Wade Wilson was charming, tall, covered in tattoos. Two women would cross his path that night. Within 24 hours, both would be dead. But what Wade Wilson did after killing them, the phone calls he made, the stories he told, the way he laughed, would turn this from a double homicide into something far more disturbing. This is the story of how a fictional anti-hero's namesake became very real evil. Kristine Melton was 35 years old, with strawberry blonde hair that she'd recently cut short after years of wearing it long. She worked as a waitress at a local Cape Coral restaurant, the kind of place where regulars knew her name and she remembered their orders. On Sunday nights, she'd FaceTime her best friend Stephanie while they watched reality TV together from their separate homes. Kristine had been going through a rough patch. A recent breakup had left her feeling vulnerable, but she was determined to get back out there, to remember what it felt like to laugh with someone new. Therefore, on that October evening, Kristine decided to go to Buddha Love, a popular bar and music venue in Fort Myers. She wore her favorite jeans and a black top that made her feel confident. Before leaving, she texted Stephanie, "Going out tonight. Wish me luck." The bar was crowded, pulsing with music and conversation. Kristine ordered a vodka cranberry and found a spot near the stage. That's when she noticed him. Wade Wilson, 6'1", covered in intricate tattoos that told stories she couldn't quite read in the dim light. Those tattoos would later tell investigators a story Wade never intended to share. He had an easy smile, the kind that reached his eyes. When he introduced himself, making a joke about sharing a name with Ryan Reynolds' character, Kristine laughed. He seemed harmless, even charming. They talked for hours. Wade told her he was 25. He was actually 26. That he worked in construction, that he'd had a tough childhood but was turning things around. Kristine found herself opening up too, talking about her recent breakup, her job, her dreams of maybe going back to school. When the bar started closing down around 2 a.m., Wade asked if she wanted to continue their conversation somewhere quieter. "My place isn't far," Kristine offered, and Wade smiled that easy smile again. Meanwhile, across Cape Coral, Diane Ruiz was asleep in her home on Southeast 47th Terrace. At 43, Diane had built a quiet life for herself. She worked as a bartender at the Moose Lodge, where everyone knew her as the woman who'd remember your drink order after serving you just twice. She had a 10-year-old son, Zane, who was her entire world. Every morning, she'd wake up early to make him breakfast before school, usually scrambled eggs with cheese, just the way he liked them. That night, Zane was staying with his father, part of their regular custody arrangement. Diane had no idea that in just a few hours a stranger would break into her home. She had no idea that her son would wake up on Monday morning, October 7th, without a mother. Therefore, when Wade Wilson arrived at her door hours later, Diane had no warning. But something was wrong with Wade Wilson that night. As Kristine would later tell her friend in what would be her final phone call, Wade's demeanor changed the moment they arrived at her home. The easy charm evaporated. His eyes, which had seemed so warm in the bar's dim lighting, now looked flat and cold in her living room. He just got weird, Kristine would tell Stephanie in a hushed phone call from her bathroom around 3:30 a.m. "I think I need him to leave." But Wade didn't leave. Instead, according to what he would later tell multiple people, including his own father, he snapped. The word he used was specific. Not angry, not upset. Snapped. Like something inside him simply broke, and what emerged was something monstrous. The details of what happened in Kristine's home are disturbing. Wilson himself would later describe them with a casualness that chilled investigators. He strangled Kristine Melton in her own bed, maintaining pressure long after she stopped struggling. But then, and this is where the disturbance becomes something darker, he stayed in her home. He used her phone. He smoked cigarettes on her porch. He behaved as if nothing had happened. But it wasn't just that he used her phone. It was WHO he called first that would shock investigators. Therefore, Kristine's phone kept buzzing. Stephanie, worried after that bathroom call, was texting, "Are you okay? Please answer. I'm getting scared. But Wade Wilson made a decision. He couldn't stay there, but he also wasn't done. Something had been unleashed in him that night, something that demanded more. He took Kristine's car-white Mazda and drove through the dark streets of Cape Coral. It was now approaching 5 a.m. on October 7th. Most of the city was still asleep, but Wade Wilson was very much awake. Therefore, he was hunting. The house on Southeast 47th Terrace was chosen at random. Wilson would later tell investigators he simply saw it and decided that whoever lived there would be his next victim. He had no idea Diane Ruiz was inside. He had no idea she was a mother. He just knew he wanted to kill again. But what happened next would reveal the true depth of Wilson's depravity. He broke into Diane's home through a window, moving through the dark house until he found her bedroom. Diane woke up to a stranger standing over her bed, a tall man covered in tattoos, someone she'd never seen before. She tried to run, but Wilson was faster. He strangled Diane Ruiz in her own home, just as he had done to Kristine hours earlier. But this time something was different. This time, he didn't just want her dead. According to his own confession, after killing Diane, Wilson went to her kitchen, found a knife, and returned to her body. What he did next was so disturbing that even hardened investigators struggled to process it. But what investigators discovered next would turn a double homicide into something far more disturbing. Therefore, when the sun rose on October 7th, 2 women were dead, and Wade Wilson was driving around Cape Coral in a stolen car, making phone calls that would ultimately lead to his capture. But those phone calls, that's where this story takes its darkest turn. Wilson called his biological father, Stephen Testaseca, and confessed to both murders. But he didn't sound remorseful or panicked. According to Testaseca's later testimony, Wade was excited. He gave graphic details. He seemed proud. When his father expressed disbelief, Wade sent him evidence descriptions so specific that Testaseca knew his son was telling the truth. But Wade wasn't done talking. He called his ex-girlfriend, Melissa Montanez. He told her what he'd done. She thought he was lying, maybe high on drugs. But then he started giving details about the women, about their homes, about how they died. Melissa realized with growing horror that he was telling the truth. He had used Kristine's phone first, practicing his confession, testing out different versions of his story before using his own phone. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was how many people knew what he'd done and when they knew it. Naturally, because Wade Wilson apparently couldn't help himself, he called another friend, and another. Each time he told the story of what he'd done with increasing detail, sometimes laughing, sometimes speaking in a matter-of-fact tone that was somehow even more chilling than excitement would have been. Meanwhile, both women's bodies had been discovered. Kristine's friend, Stephanie, after a night of unanswered texts, had called police for a welfare check. They found Kristine in her bed. Just miles away, Diane's ex-husband had arrived to drop off their son and found her front door open. He found Diane and immediately called 911, shielding their 10-year-old son from seeing his mother's body. The Cape Coral Police Department now had 2 murder scenes, 2 women killed in the same manner within hours of each other. They had no immediate suspects, no obvious connection between the victims. But then the phone calls started coming in, people reporting that someone named Wade Wilson had called them, claiming to have killed 2 women. By the afternoon of October 7th, police had a name, a description, and a stolen vehicle to track. The hunt for Wade Wilson had begun. But what happened next would reveal just how much Wade Wilson wanted to be caught. Wilson was arrested that same day, but not because police found him. Instead, he essentially turned himself in through sheer stupidity and arrogance. After spending the day driving around in Kristine's stolen car, making his confessional phone calls, Wilson decided he was hungry. He pulled into a parking lot and approached a man named Christopher Fedden, asking for directions to a McDonald's. But here's where Wilson's behavior became truly bizarre. Instead of just getting directions, Wilson struck up a conversation with Fedden. But Wilson apparently couldn't go more than a few hours without confessing. Therefore, he told this complete stranger that he had just killed 2 women. Fedden, understandably disturbed, gave Wilson directions and immediately called 911 as Wilson drove away. By this point, police had multiple reports of Wilson's location and his stolen vehicle. Therefore, they tracked him down within hours. When officers approached Wilson, he didn't run. He didn't resist. He smiled, a slow, satisfied smile that made Officer Martinez's skin crawl. The arrest report noted the sound of Wilson's laughter echoing off the concrete as they placed him in handcuffs. A sound Martinez would later describe as hollow, like something was missing inside him. Wilson's hands were steady. No trembling. No nervous sweat despite the Florida heat. Time seemed to slow as Wilson turned to face the officers, his movements deliberate, almost theatrical. In that moment, Martinez had a single thought that would haunt him. He's enjoying this. But the most chilling moment came during his interrogation. When detectives asked Wilson why he had killed Kristine and Diane, he shrugged. "I just wanted to," he said. When they pressed for more, for some explanation that might make sense of the senseless, Wilson gave them nothing. No motive. No trigger beyond that word he kept using. Snapped. The physical evidence was overwhelming. Wilson's DNA was found at both scenes. The women's blood was found on his clothing. His cell phone records placed him at both locations. But it was Wilson's own words, his multiple confessions, his proud recounting of every horrible detail that sealed his fate. What emerged during the investigation was a portrait of a man who killed not out of anger or passion or even mental illness, but simply because he could. Because he wanted to. Because something inside him had broken, therefore he had decided to break others. Wade Wilson was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder in June 2024. The jury recommended the death penalty, and the judge agreed. During his years awaiting trial, Wilson had covered his face with disturbing tattoos, including Nazi symbols and the numbers 666, transforming himself into a visual representation of the monster he had proven himself to be. In victim impact statements, Diane Ruiz's son, Zane, now a teenager, spoke about growing up without his mother, about the breakfast she never got to make him again, about all the moments she would miss. Kristine Melton's friend Stephanie talked about their lost conversation, about the fear in Kristine's voice during that final phone call from the bathroom. Wade Wilson showed no remorse during his sentencing. He smirked. He winked at cameras. He had become exactly what he seemed to want to be notorious. A real-life villain who shared a name with a fictional antihero, but possessed none of the redemptive qualities.